The espresso machine's his startled Paige Fletcher awake at 4:45 a.m., 15 minutes before her alarm. Another day at Brew and Bean had begun whether she was ready or not. Rubbing sleep from her eyes, she shuffled toward the industrial-sized coffee maker that had become both her nemesis and livelihood over the past year. The small shop nestled on the ground floor of the prestigious Archer building had to be ready by 5:30 a.m. sharp for the parade of office workers who'd file in for their morning caffeine fix. By 6:15 a.m., Paige had transformed from a zombie to something resembling a functioning human. Hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, green apron tied, pastry case filled, and coffee beans ground. She flipped the sign to open just as her coworker Mia arrived. "Morning, sunshine," Mia said, tying her own apron. "Ready for another day of serving overpriced coffee to uptight business people." Paige laughed. Someone has to fuel their capitalist dreams. The morning rush was predictable harried assistants ordering 5 drinks at once, investment bankers barking orders into phones while pointing at menu items, marketing executives debating the merits of oat milk versus almond. At precisely 7:30 a.m., he arrived. The 7:30 guy, as she and Mia had dubbed him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that always looked perfectly styled despite the spring drizzle outside. He wore tailored suits that Paige could tell cost more than her monthly rent, but unlike many of the Archer building occupants, he always made eye contact when ordering. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and measured. "The usual?" Paige asked, already reaching for a large cup. He smiled, a genuine one that reached his eyes. "Please, and maybe one of those blueberry muffins today, coming right up." Paige turned to prepare his order, a large Americano with room for cream, no fancy syrups or complicated instructions. She appreciated the simplicity. "Busy morning?" He asked, making small talk as she worked. "The usual chaos," she replied. "How about upstairs, saving the world one spreadsheet at a time?" he chuckled. "Something like that." As she handed him his change, their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected jolt through her hand. Ridiculous, she thought. He was just another suit who happened to be polite and devastatingly handsome. "Have a great day," she said, professional smile firmly in place. "You too, Paige." She blinked in surprise. She always wore a name tag, but few customers bothered to use it. Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of commuters heading for the elevators. "MMMM," Mia hummed beside her. "The 7:30 guy knows your name. Progress?" "Oh, stop," Paige said, rolling her eyes. "He probably just read my name tag for the first time." "Or," Mia countered, "he's secretly been in love with you for months and is finally working up the courage to ask you out." "Right. Because millionaires who work in the Archer building are just dying to date baristas." Mia shrugged. "You never know. What's his name anyway?" Paige realized she had no idea. "I don't know. He pays cash and I've never seen a card." Mystery man it is, then. The next morning, Paige found herself glancing at the door more frequently as 7:30 approached. When he walked in, she noticed how the other customers seemed to part for him unconsciously, as if sensing his importance. "Good morning, Paige," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice made her heart flutter traitorously. "Good morning," she replied, then added boldly, "You know, you have me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I don't know yours." His eyes widened slightly in surprise, then crinkled with amusement. Daniel Archer." Paige nearly dropped the cup she was holding. "Archer, as in?" "The building, yes," he said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Family name? Oh," 1,000 questions flooded her mind, but customers were lining up behind him. "Well, nice to officially meet you, Daniel. The usual, please." He handed her a $20 bill and dropped the change in the tip jar as always. As he left with his coffee, Paige turned to find Mia staring at her with wide eyes. "Did he just say Archer?" Mia whispered. "As in Archer Investments." "As in the multi-billion-dollar company that owns half the commercial real estate in the city?" Paige nodded mutely. "Holy shit, Paige. Your 7:30 guy isn't just some random suit. He's Daniel Archer. The Daniel Archer. Forbes 30 under 40. Youngest CEO in the company's history after his father stepped down. That can't be right, Paige said, though the evidence was mounting. The expensive suits, the way people moved around him, the fact that he owned the building they were standing in. Google him, Mia insisted, shoving her phone at Paige. Sure enough, there he was. Daniel Archer, 32, CEO of Archer Investments, estimated net worth, $450 million. Paige felt dizzy. She'd been making small talk with a millionaire for months, completely unaware. And he comes here every day for a simple Americano when he could have his own personal barista, Mia mused. Interesting. The next morning, Paige felt unaccountably nervous as 7:30 approached. When Daniel walked in, she tried to act normal, but knowing who he was made her hands shake slightly as she prepared his coffee. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her fumble with the lid. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just a little tired today. Long night class," she explained. "I'm finishing my degree in environmental science." One class at a time, interest flashed in his eyes. "That's impressive, working full-time and going to school," she shrugged. "It's taking forever, but I'll get there eventually." "What do you plan to do with the degree?" "Environmental consulting, hopefully. Help companies reduce their carbon footprint, implement sustainable practices." She stopped herself, realizing she was rambling to someone who probably didn't care. "Anyway, here's your coffee." "That sounds fascinating," he said, and seemed like he genuinely meant it. "Have you looked into GreenPath Consulting? They're doing great work in that field." "Their dream job territory," Paige admitted, "but they only hire people with experience, which is the classic catch-22. Daniel nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at his watch. "I should get going. Have a good day, Paige. You too, Mr. Archer." He paused at the door. "Daniel, please." For the next week, their morning interactions continued similarly brief, pleasant exchanges that left Paige increasingly curious about the man behind the suit. Despite knowing his identity now, she found him remarkably down to earth for someone of his wealth and status. On Friday morning, the cafe was particularly busy, and Paige barely had time to breathe between orders. When Daniel reached the front of the line, he looked concerned. "Rough morning." Paige blew a stray hair from her face. "Our second espresso machine broke down, and Mia called in sick. I'm solo until Jen arrives at 9. Can I help?" he asked, surprising her. "Unless you have barista experience hidden under that suit, probably not," she joked. "I worked at a coffee shop during college," he said with a half smile, "though I admit it's been a while." Paige laughed, imagining Daniel Archer working a service job. "Thanks, but I think your shareholders might object to you slinging coffee." "The usual," he nodded, then hesitated before adding, "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime." The question caught her so off guard that she stared at him for several seconds, barely registering the growing impatience of the customers behind him. "Dinner," she finally managed. "Yes, with me, outside of this cafe." His confidence seemed to waver slightly at her hesitation. "Unless that would be uncomfortable for you, given that I'm technically your landlord." The reminder of their drastically different positions made Paige hesitate. Dating a customer was inadvisable. Dating a millionaire who owned the building where she worked seemed like the plot of a movie, not her real life. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she said carefully. Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment perhaps, but he nodded. "I understand. Have a good weekend, Paige." He paid for his coffee and left without waiting for it. Paige felt a strange hollowness as she watched him go, wondering if she'd made a mistake. The weekend passed slowly. Paige found herself thinking about Daniel more than she cared to admit. By Monday morning, she'd rehearsed several versions of a speech explaining why dating would be complicated but not impossible, depending on how their interaction went. But 7:30 came and went with no sign of Daniel. By 8 o'clock, Paige had to accept that he wasn't coming. "Maybe he's traveling for business," Mia suggested, noting Paige's frequent glances at the door. "Maybe," Paige agreed, though something told her that wasn't it. She'd rejected him, and now he was avoiding her. The thought made her chest ache unexpectedly. Tuesday and Wednesday brought the same result: no Daniel. The routine of the cafe continued, but Paige felt his absence keenly. Had she really developed feelings for someone she only spoke to for a few minutes each day? Or was it just her pride hurt by his sudden disappearance? On Thursday afternoon, Paige was surprised to see a familiar face entering the cafe long after the morning rush. "Mia said I might find you here," said the woman, whom Paige recognized as Daniel's assistant. They'd chatted occasionally when she came in to pick up coffee for meetings. "Rebecca, right?" Paige said, wiping her hands on a towel. "What can I get you?" "Nothing, actually. I came to give you this." She handed Paige an envelope. From Mr. Archer. Paige's heart raced as she took it. "Is everything okay?" Rebecca smiled enigmatically. "That depends on your response, I suppose." With that cryptic statement, she left. Paige waited until her break to open the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note on heavy stationery. "Paige, I apologize for my abrupt absence this week. I was called away to our Seattle office for an emergency. I respect your hesitation about dinner, but I'd like to explain something. I've been coming to Brew and Bean every morning for the past 6 months, not because it's convenient, but because seeing you has become the highlight of my day. Your genuine smile, your kind interactions with every customer, the way you remember everyone's orders, these small things have brightened my mornings immeasurably. I understand the complications of our situation, but I'd like the chance to know you better, away from the roles of customer and barista. If you're willing, I'll be at Marcello's at 7 p.m. this Saturday. No pressure, just dinner and conversation. Sincerely, Daniel." Paige read the note 3 times, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. It was old-fashioned and romantic in a way she hadn't expected from someone like Daniel. Saturday evening found Paige standing outside Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, nervously smoothing the fabric of her emerald green dress. She'd almost talked herself out of coming a dozen times, but curiosity and something deeper had won out. Daniel was already waiting inside, looking slightly anxious until he spotted her. His face transformed with a smile that made her breath catch. "You came," he said, standing to greet her. "I did," she replied, suddenly shy, though I'm not entirely sure why. "Because you're curious," he suggested, pulling out her chair. "And maybe, like me, you think there might be something worth exploring here." The restaurant was intimate and elegant without being intimidating. Daniel ordered wine after consulting with her on preferences, and they fell into conversation more easily than Paige had anticipated. "So," she said after they'd ordered, "you've been coming to our cafe just to see me." He looked slightly embarrassed. "It sounds stalkerish when you put it that way." "I genuinely needed coffee that first day, but after that." He shrugged. "I found myself looking forward to our brief conversations. You were the only person all day who treated me like a normal human being rather than Daniel Archer, CEO." "That's because I had no idea who you were," Paige pointed out. "Exactly," he smiled. "It was refreshing. And now that I know, now I'm hoping you'll still see me as just Daniel." As the evening progressed, Paige discovered that behind the tailored suits and impressive title was a man with a self-deprecating sense of humor and genuine passion for his work. He explained how he was trying to shift Archer Investments toward funding more environmentally sustainable projects, facing resistance from older board members in the process. "That's why I was so interested when you mentioned your environmental science degree," he admitted. "We need more people with that perspective in the corporate world." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Archer?" she teased. "Would you take it if I was?" "No," she said honestly. "I wouldn't want anyone thinking I got it because we're—" She trailed off, unsure how to define what they were. "Having dinner," he supplied with a smile. "Fair enough." By the time they finished dessert, a tiramisu they shared, Paige felt like she'd known Daniel for years rather than hours. The conversation had flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from childhood memories to favorite books to travel dreams. As they left the restaurant, Daniel asked, Would you like to walk for a bit? The riverfront's beautiful at night. The April evening was mild, stars visible despite the city lights. They strolled along the riverwalk, close but not touching, until Paige shivered slightly in the breeze. Without a word, Daniel removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The gesture was so simple yet so intimate that Paige felt her heart skip. "Thank you," she said softly, "my pleasure." They stopped at a viewing point overlooking the water, the city's skyline reflected in its surface. "Can I ask you something?" Paige said, turning to face him. "Anything." "Why me? You could date models, actresses, women from your social circle. Why pursue a coffee shop barista?" Daniel considered her question seriously. "Because none of those women look at me the way you do, like you're actually seeing me, not my bank account or my family name. Because you're passionate about making a difference in the world, because you make me laugh." He stepped closer. "Because when I walk into that cafe and see your smile, nothing else matters." The sincerity in his voice made Paige's chest tighten. She reached up impulsively, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "That's a good answer." His hand caught hers, keeping it against his face. "May I kiss you, Paige?" The question, asked with such gentlemanly restraint, made her smile. "Yes," she whispered. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss tender and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. When they finally broke apart, Paige felt dizzy. "Wow," she breathed. Daniel laughed softly. "I've wanted to do that for months." "Was it worth the wait?" she teased. His expression grew serious. "More than you know." After their first date, things progressed naturally. Daniel resumed his morning coffee visits, though now they were accompanied by lingering glances and private smiles that made Mia roll her eyes dramatically. "You two are disgustingly cute," she complained after Daniel left one morning, having pressed a quick kiss to Paige's hand over the counter. "We're not that bad," Paige protested, though she couldn't stop smiling. Their second date was a surprise picnic at the Botanical Gardens. Daniel arrived at Paige's apartment with a wicker basket and a blanket. "I thought about taking you to some fancy restaurant," he explained as they settled under a flowering cherry tree, "but this seemed more us." "Us," Paige repeated, enjoying how naturally the word came. "I like that." He'd prepared the food himself, simple sandwiches, fruit, and homemade cookies that were slightly misshapen but delicious. "You baked these?" Paige asked incredulously, taking another bite. "Don't sound so surprised," he laughed. "I do have some domestic skills." The Millionaire CEO bakes cookies. Who would have thought? His smile faltered slightly. "Does that still bother you, the money thing?" Paige considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not because of the money itself, but because of what it represents." "Our lives are so different, Daniel. You fly to Seattle for emergency meetings. I pick up extra shifts to cover my electric bill." He took her hand. "I understand the concern, but I'm just a person, Paige. The bank account doesn't define me." "I know that," she said, squeezing his fingers. "I'm trying not to let it get in my head." As spring turned to summer, they fell into a rhythm. Weeknight dinners at Paige's modest apartment, where Daniel insisted on cooking after discovering her culinary skills, were limited to microwave meals. Weekend adventures exploring parts of the city Paige had never seen, despite living there her whole life. Quiet mornings where Daniel would arrive at the cafe early, before opening, helping Paige set up while stealing kisses between tasks. The first time Paige visited his penthouse apartment, she'd been nervous to the point of nausea. The doorman had greeted her by name, directing her to the private elevator that required a key card to access the top floor. When the doors opened directly into his foyer, Paige had frozen momentarily, overwhelmed by the expansive space with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a panoramic view of the city. "This is where you live," she'd whispered, taking in the modern furnishings, the original artwork on the walls, the gleaming kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "It's just a place," Daniel had said, watching her reaction carefully. "Home is where you are." The sentiment had melted her anxiety, and soon she was comfortable enough to tease him about his excessive number of throw pillows, and the fact that his refrigerator contained nothing but takeout containers and expensive wine. "For someone who can cook, you certainly don't stock much food," she'd observed. "I'm rarely here," he'd admitted. "It's too empty." Their first challenge came 3 months into their relationship when photos of them appeared on a local gossip blog. "Archer Air slumming IT with barista," read the tasteless headline, accompanied by pictures of them holding hands at a farmer's market. Paige had been mortified, especially when customers began asking if she was that girl dating Daniel Archer. Some seemed impressed, others judgmental, but all treated her differently. "I hate this," she'd confessed to Daniel that night, showing him the blog on her phone. "I feel like a sideshow attraction." Daniel had been furious about the invasion of their privacy but also deeply concerned for Paige. "I'm so sorry," he'd said. "This is exactly what I wanted to protect you from. My family has dealt with this kind of attention for years, but you didn't sign up for it." "No, I didn't," she'd agreed, tears threatening, "but I signed up for you and you're worth it." The incident had drawn them closer, with Daniel becoming more protective and Paige more determined not to let outside opinions affect what they were building together. By fall, Paige had finished her degree, and with Daniel's encouragement, though pointedly not his direct intervention, had secured an entry-level position at Greenpath Consulting. She'd given notice at Brew and Bean, feeling both excitement for her new career and nostalgia for the place where she'd met Daniel. "You realize this means no more free coffee," she'd teased on her last day, serving him his usual Americano. "A small price to pay," he'd replied, watching her with pride. "Besides, I hear there's this invention called a coffee maker. Maybe I'll get one for my apartment." Or, she'd suggested, heart racing at her own boldness, "I could just make it for you in the mornings if I happen to be there." His eyes had darkened with emotion. "Are you suggesting what I think you are?" "Maybe," she'd said. "We practically live together already, might as well make it official." 2 weeks later, Paige moved into Daniel's penthouse, bringing her modest possessions and unintentionally transforming the space from a showplace to a home. Her battered college textbooks joined his business tomes on the bookshelves. Her collection of mismatched coffee mugs found a place alongside his elegant china. Her thriving houseplants brought life to previously sterile corners. "I love what you've done to the place," Daniel had commented, finding her arranging framed photos on the mantel, candid shots of them together, her family, his family once they'd warmed to her. "Is it too much?" she'd asked uncertainly. "I can keep more in storage," if he'd cut her off with a kiss. "It's perfect. It finally feels like a home." As Paige settled into her new job and their new living arrangement, she discovered that Daniel's wealth did have advantages she couldn't deny. The ability to travel spontaneously led to a magical weekend in Paris for her birthday. The connections he had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. But most importantly, the security allowed them both to focus on what mattered, building a future together. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after she'd moved in, Daniel suggested they take a walk to see the holiday lights downtown. Despite the cold, Paige agreed, bundling up in the cashmere scarf he'd given her as an early present. They ended up at Brew and Bean, which was closed for the holiday but lit with a warm glow from inside. Daniel pulled out a key. "Why do you have a key to my old workplace?" Paige asked suspiciously. "I own the building, remember?" he reminded her with a mysterious smile. "I have keys to everything." Inside, the cafe had been transformed. Tiny white lights twinkled from every surface, candles glowed on the tables, and in the center of the room stood a small Christmas tree decorated with coffee-themed ornaments. "Daniel," Paige breathed, taking it all in. "What is this?" "This," he said, leading her to the very spot where they'd first met, "is where my life changed forever. Where a grumpy CEO ordered an Americano and met the woman who would teach him what really matters." Paige felt tears welling as he continued. I came in here looking for caffeine, and I found love instead. I was surrounded by wealth but empty inside until you filled my life with laughter and warmth and purpose." To her shock, Daniel lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Paige Fletcher, you've made me happier than I ever thought possible. You've seen past the title and the money to the man underneath. You've challenged me, supported me, and loved me simply for who I am. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The ring inside the box was stunning, a solitary emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the twinkling lights around them. "Green to match your eyes," Daniel explained softly, "and to represent the passion for the environment that brought us together." Tears spilled down Paige's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." As he slid the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, Paige marveled at how completely her life had changed in a year. From sleepily making coffee at dawn to finding a love so deep and true it took her breath away. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered against his lips. "Believe it," he murmured back. "This is just the beginning." Later, as they celebrated with champagne at the small table where he'd sat every morning, Daniel revealed one more surprise. "I have a confession," he said, looking slightly guilty. "I knew who you were before you knew who I was." Paige raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Remember that presentation you gave in your environmental science class last spring about corporate responsibility and sustainable practices?" She nodded, confused. "How do you know about that?" "I was there," he admitted. "I guest lectured for the business portion of the course that day and arrived early. You were so passionate, so articulate, so determined to make a difference. I was completely captivated. Then I recognized you at the coffee shop the next morning and, well, suddenly I needed a daily Americano." Paige stared at him in disbelief. "You mean our meeting wasn't an accident? The timing was," he assured her. "But falling for you was inevitable from the moment I heard you speak. Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding like I'd been stalking you," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "And then it never seemed like the right time." Paige shook her head in amazement. "So all those conversations about environmental consulting were genuine," he insisted. "I just had context you didn't know about." She considered this revelation, then smiled. "You know what this means, don't you? You didn't fall for the barista, you fell for the environmental scientist. I was the one slumming it with a coffee customer." Daniel laughed, pulling her close. "However it happened, it was the best thing that ever happened to me." "To us," Paige corrected, looking at her ring glittering in the candlelight. "To us." 1 year later, they married in a ceremony that blended elegance with simplicity, much like their relationship. The reception was held in the garden of the Archer family estate, transformed with sustainable decorations that Paige had insisted upon. By then, she had been promoted at Greenpath and was making a name for herself separate from her connection to Daniel. The gossip blogs had moved on to other topics, and their life together had found a comfortable rhythm that honored both their worlds. They honeymooned in Costa Rica, splitting their time between a luxury eco-resort and volunteer work at a conservation center, a perfect representation of how they'd merged their lives. On their last night, sitting on the beach watching the sunset, Daniel wrapped his arms around Paige from behind. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "Though I do miss our morning coffee ritual sometimes." "We could always buy a cafe," he suggested teasingly. "You could make Americanos just for me." "Or," Paige said, turning in his arms with a mischievous smile, "you could learn to use the espresso machine I bought you for Christmas." Daniel laughed, the sound carrying across the empty beach. "Deal. But only if you promise to always be my first customer." "For the rest of our lives," she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in colors as vibrant as the love they'd found in a coffee shop where a millionaire had fallen for a barista who had seen the man behind the money and loved him for exactly who he was.